Namaste, and welcome to the first part of this course. We now find ourselves in the introduction, which is supposed to show us a little bit the deeper sides of yoga. So we talk about philosophy, and we talk about the history of yoga. We do this in order to understand what yoga actually is, and to get a proper foundation of the question why. Because in order to really successfully do something, I think it's also always really important to have the question why answered. And this is what I'm trying to do here now, to make you understand why we're practicing yoga and why the following practices will lead you to a more healthy, happy, and fulfilled life. So let's start. Just in the beginning, we need to make sure that we're all on the same level of what yoga actually means. So when we hear the word yoga, what comes to mind is the physical practice that we do on our mats. This is something that evolved over the last few hundred years, where yoga, especially when it came into the West in the last couple of decades, it has undergone a very rapid transformation. So yoga, of course, is more than merely asana. Yoga is a philosophy of life, and as such it was created. The physical aspects came a lot later. It all started off by a philosophy how to conduct a proper life and how to reach higher states of consciousness and finally experience moksha, liberation, from this physical dimension through this physical dimension. So then it means it's also a system to reach holistic states of health, because we're going through this physical body into higher states. We're here on this earth to have an experience with this physical body. So yoga uses that as a way to reach higher states of consciousness. And we do this through personal and spiritual development, in order to eventually bring us to a state of union. Yoga means to yoke, so to bring together. And it brings together that what our ego thinks is separate, which means that we think we're separate from everyone else and from the universe and everything as a whole. And this is what yoga tries to make us realize once more, to see that we're all one. So there are a lot of paths to yoga, of yoga and to yoga, to the union. There is the Kundalini yoga, which is the yoga of the energy. We have Raja yoga, which is more focused on meditation. We have Karma yoga, which is selfless service. We have Bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of devotion. And we have Jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge. And finally we have Hatha yoga, which is the physical focus of yoga. And without going in too much detail into the other parts, this course is mainly about Hatha yoga. And when we hear Hatha yoga these days, we think about the traditional Hatha yoga practice that we can do in a yoga studio. However, also Vinyasa yoga, Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga, are also Hatha yoga. Hatha yoga just literally means the physical body, and is put together from the word Ha and the word Tha, which together means lunar and solar energy, and it tries to bring balance into these opposites within the body. So Hatha yoga developed in order to use the physical body to create this union. Also, all the other parts of yoga, the six paths, lead to union. And just because we're focusing on Hatha yoga doesn't mean we're not going to use different parts of the other aspects of yoga. But this course is mainly focused on the Hatha yoga philosophy. So let me give you a short overview of the history of yoga. the pre-classic, about 2700 BC, started off with what is nowadays called the Sarasvati civilization in the Indus Valley. This is a very ancient civilization and is sometimes even proposed to have been a lot longer there than current science is acknowledging, but this is a different topic. Just know it's really old, and it might be even older than we think it is. In this civilization we find the first mentioning of yoga in the Rig Vedas. And the Rig Vedas are these very old scriptures that contain a lot of aphorisms. So aphorisms are just small, concise sentences containing a lot of meaning. And these Rig Vedas have been organized in something that is called the Upanishads. So the Upanishads are basically an accumulation of old scriptures, and they contain far more than hundreds of scriptures, I think even more than 200 scriptures. So from these Upanishads, in the classical yoga period, which is about 500 BC to 880, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras emerged. And what Patanjali did, Patanjali is also nowadays referred often as the godfather, the father of modern yoga, the father of yoga, because what he did, he for the first time did a systematic delineation of yoga. So he crammed through all these Yoga Sutras, through all the Upanishads, to all these scriptures, and made a proper organization and documentation of these scriptures. What emerged from this was his very famous eightfold path to spiritual enlightenment. So when before we had this huge mumbo jumbo of like different scriptures that were not organized, what he did, he understood all of it, and made it into a path that everyone can follow. And there is a path for people that completely devote their life to spirituality, but there's also a path for householders, for everyone, to reach higher states of consciousness and maybe also eventually reach samadhi. And this eightfold path is also going to be a very big focus of this course. In the post-classic period, now already after Christ, 800 to 1700, for the first time yoga was really more focused on the physical body as well as health and longevity. Because for the first time they understood that this physical body is a vehicle for us and a proper, valid way to reach enlightenment. So this is also the time where the Hatha Yoga Pradipika emerged, which is a different scripture that is very similar to the Eightfold Path, but also has a few other aspects that the Eightfold Path does not contain in that sense. And it's also a lot younger, the scripture, which is also going to be a big part of this course. Now we reach the modern period. In the modern period, from 17 to 1900, yoga emerges in the West. So just a few hundred years ago, yoga for the first time comes to the West. And there was a very big integration process happening where yoga, which is kind of an Eastern philosophy, integrates for the first time into Western philosophy. And of course the Western history and the Western society at these times was vastly different. So in order for a Western mind, which is very rationally oriented, to understand what yoga is all about, there was a lot of adaptation. So a lot of very highly educated scholars from the East were sent here to the West to bring this wisdom here, and they had to adapt it in a way for us to also be able to understand and integrate it. And what happened then is that yoga separated in a lot of different schools of thought, due to the fact that different people from the East came and emerged and made it into a Western way so we can also understand it. And this brings us to modern yoga. And modern yoga is something that you could refer as to Hatha yoga, which is what we do here, is mainly physically oriented, which fits very well into our very aesthetic, physically oriented culture. And I think not exclusively, but the two most dominant are Hatha Yoga, the very classical yoga approach that we have. And then we have the Ashtanga Vinyasa, or the Vinyasa part. Well, Ashtanga Vinyasa was the father of the classic Vinyasa, which loosened itself from the bonds of a very strict, rigid system. And from then on, from the Vinyasa, a lot of other things emerged. The Power Yoga, all these things that became even looser from the traditional methods, which is not per se bad. However, especially in Ashtanga Vinyasa, it is very important. It's always mentioned that it's very important to come back to the roots, because the systematic approach, even to asana, is there for a specific reason. We don't just follow these postures because it was once written and there was no reason. There is a reason behind this. And the reason behind this is basically why we also follow these 8 steps of Patanjali, because the Ashtanga Vinyasa system is a mirror. It's the other side of the coin of the Yoga Sutras. So that's where we find ourselves today, where yoga has split off in a lot of different directions, and no one is really sure anymore what to do, what yoga actually is. Yoga has become a pop word, and I'm really hoping to make you understand more depth and especially the vastness of what yoga actually is. So I mentioned the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras as well as the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and this is something that I want to go a little bit more into detail now. So the classical yoga period, this is where the Eightfold Path emerged, and the post-classical period is where the Hatha Yoga Pradipika emerged. And this is the Eightfold Path. So we have 8 steps. The yamas, which is our outward behavior. We have the niyamas, our inward behavior. We have asana, which is referring to our physical practice of the physical body. We have pranayama, which is our breath work. Then we have pratyahara, which is control over the senses. Then we have dharana, which is concentration. And then dhyana, meditation. And finally, we have samadhi, which is the highest goal that we're trying to reach and achieve in yoga. When we now look at the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, what's circled here is the pranayama and the kriya part. This is something that has become very clear in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, these specific pranayama practices, and on top of that the kriya, the shat kriya, the 6 cleansing methods. So this is another part that we're going to incorporate in this course. So we're going to have the Eightfold Path in all its steps, and the Hatha Yoga Pradipika in all its steps, which are very similar to the Eightfold Path, with the addition that we're going to focus on specific pranayamas and on specific kriyas. In this session, I would like to introduce you to the outward and inward behavior that are called the yamas and niyamas of the Eightfold Path. So, the different parts of the yamas and niyamas are as follows. We have first ahimsa, which is non-violence. We have satya, which is truthfulness. We have asteya, non-stealing. We have brahmacharya, moderation. We have aparigraha, non-attachment. We have saucha, is cleanliness. Santosha, contentment. Tapas, discipline. Svadhyaya, self-study. And Ishvara Pranidhana is surrender. They are a bit like the 10 Commandments, just that they seem to be more eternally valid, they go into a bit more depth and are especially geared towards personal development and spiritual development, as well as helping us to achieve health and happiness. In a moment we're going to go into more detail into each of them. But for now, I just want to say that all these points are as much part of a yoga practice than everything else that we're doing on or off the mat. This is the foundation. The yamas and niyamas are the foundation that brings us on the path of yoga. With active practice of these commandments, so to say, we find ourselves at the start of the yogic journey. And once we establish these more and more, we will see that our physical practice, as well as our meditation practice, will become deeper. We will see that we gain more momentum and are able to understand and feel our practice on a much deeper level than ever before. Now we're going to go into more detail into each of the different yamas and niyamas.